The door to Bellini's flew open so violently that every glass on the nearest table rattled. For a split second, the entire restaurant froze. A woman near the bar gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence as two little girls burst through the entrance like they were running from fire. They were small, no more than 7 years old, dressed in matching light blue dresses now smeared with dirt dust and streaks of something darker. Their faces were wild with terror, their breaths choppy and uneven, their hair tangled as if they had ripped through a storm just to get there. And in the corner, at a lonely two-person table that still held 2 untouched water glasses, Ethan Parker's entire world lurched into motion. He had been staring at the empty chair across from him for the past 30 minutes, telling himself he didn't care that his blind date hadn't shown up. He should have expected it. After all, what woman wanted to deal with a widower in his mid-30s who carried loss like a second skin? Ethan had been convinced for 5 whole years that his heart had been buried with his wife the night she died, giving birth to their son Noah. Tonight was supposed to be a small step, a quiet attempt at moving forward, a test of whether he still remembered how to sit across from someone without feeling broken. But now, as those twins stumbled into the restaurant, their terror slicing through the air sharper than glass, Ethan pushed away from his table so fast, his chair screeched across the tile. The twins scanned the room frantically, eyes sweeping past strangers, past startled faces, until both pairs locked onto him. Directly, unwavering, as if they had been told exactly who to look for. One of the girls stumbled forward, nearly tripping, but she pushed herself upright with frantic determination. "Are you Ethan Parker?" She gasped, the words tumbling out in a single breath. His stomach dropped. "Yes," he said, already moving toward them. "Yes, I'm Ethan. What happened? Are you hurt?" The second girl grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength, her small fingers clawing into the fabric like a lifeline. "You have to come," she choked out. "Please, you have to come now. Mommy is hurt. They hurt her. She's dying." A stunned silence rippled through Bellini's. Someone near the window whispered a prayer under their breath. A man at the bar stood up, but Ethan didn't wait for anyone to catch up. "Tell me what happened," he said, kneeling to their level, trying to steady the tremor in their voices with the calm he used with his most frightened patients. "Where is your mom?" Who heard her words poured out of them in overlapping fragments, men breaking into their house, yelling, pushing their mother, blood fear, running as fast as they could because she told them to find him. Him, Ethan Parker. A stranger they had never met, but somehow had been told to trust. The room seemed to tilt. "Come with me," Ethan said, pulling out his phone with one hand while guiding the girls with the other. "We're calling emergency services right now. What's your address?" The twins spoke over each other, voices splintering with panic. He repeated the numbers aloud for the operator, forcing each digit to stay clear despite the adrenaline hammering through him. As the dispatcher assured him help was on the way, someone from across the restaurant called out, asking whether he intended to pay his bill. Ethan didn't even look back. "Charge it to Ethan Parker," he snapped and pushed through the door with the twins' hands clamped tightly in his. The night outside felt colder, sharper wrong. The city sounds blurred into a distant hum as Ethan and the twins ran down the sidewalk, their footsteps uneven but desperate. 3 blocks, one girl kept whispering, breath hitching. "Mommy's on the floor. There was so much blood. She told us to find you." Ethan wanted to ask how they knew him, why their mother would send them to a stranger she'd never even met. But the urgency in their voices overpowered every question. He lengthened his stride, then shortened it again when Emma stumbled. He picked her up without hesitation, her small arms looping around his neck as Chloe kept running beside him. Sirens wailed faintly somewhere in the distance. He prayed they were coming for them. He prayed he wasn't too late. "Is the door locked?" he asked. "No," Chloe panted. "They kicked it. It was open when we left." Another punch to his gut. They reached the house, a 2-story white home with a small porch that would have seemed peaceful on any other night. But the front door, hung crooked on its hinges, kicked inward with violent force. The porch light flickered like a dying signal. Ethan felt the twins tense beside him. "Stay behind me," he said. "Do not follow me inside until I say it's safe." "But Mommy, I will get to her," Ethan said firmly. "I need you safe so I can help her." He stepped over the splintered wood and into the house. The first thing he felt was the stillness, the thick, heavy silence that follows chaos. Then he saw the destruction. A lamp shattered across the carpet. Chairs overturned. Picture frames smashed. A smear of blood on the edge of the coffee table. And then he saw her. A woman with long blonde hair lay on the floor near the sofa, her body twisted unnaturally, her dress torn, one shoe gone. Blood matted the side of her head. Her skin looked too pale in the dim light. For a split second, Ethan froze. Then his training surged forward like instinct. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. He pressed his fingers to her neck, searching for the faint drumbeat of life. Nothing. He adjusted, pressing harder. "Come on. Come on. Come on." There. A weak, flickering pulse. He exhaled so sharply it hurt. "She's alive," he whispered, mostly to convince himself. Louder into the phone, still in his hand, he said, "Pulse found. Severe head trauma. Breathing shallow. Where is that ambulance?" Through the doorway, the twins appeared clinging to each other, too frightened to stay outside. Ethan lifted a hand toward them. "She's alive," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Your mom is alive. Help is almost here." They sobbed, not the terrified sobs from before, but something softer, something aching with hope. The sirens roared closer until lights flashed across the walls. Paramedics stormed in with stretchers and medical bags. Officers followed, weapons drawn until they confirmed the house was clear. Ethan stepped back only when the medics took over, stabilizing the woman who had been meant to sit across from him tonight. The woman whose daughters had run through the city to find him. The woman whose life clung to a thin thread he was now desperate to keep intact. A police officer turned to Ethan. "Sir, we need your statement. Who are you in relation to the victim?" Ethan opened his mouth. What was he, a stranger, a blind date that never happened? Before he could answer, Chloe gripped his hand tightly and whispered, "You're the one Mommy picked." Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know what that meant yet. But as he looked at those two trembling girls, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening, whatever storm had swept them into his life, he wasn't walking away. The ambulance peeled away from the curb lights, slicing across the darkness, leaving Chloe and Emma shaking in its wake. Their mother was inside, disappearing behind tinted glass, as if being swallowed whole. The girls surged forward instinctively, but a police officer stepped between them, his hands gentle yet unyielding. "You can't go with her," he murmured. "They need space to work." Chloe turned her small face streaked with tears and locked onto Ethan with a desperation that pierced straight through him. "Please, we have to go with her. She needs us." Her voice cracked on the last word, as if the fear inside her had suddenly split open. Ethan stepped forward before he even chose to. The officer facing him was broad and stern, a man built to control chaos, not soothe children. But Ethan held his ground. "Officer," he said evenly, "these girls just watched their mother get beaten half to death. You separate them now, you will break something in them you cannot repair. Let me take them to the hospital. Question us there." The officer's eyes narrowed. He assessed Ethan the way one evaluates an unexpected variable, unwelcome, suspicious, inconvenient. "And you are who exactly?" "I'm Ethan Parker," he replied, steady as stone. "A licensed physical therapist. I work with trauma patients every day. I know what they'll walk into at the hospital. They need someone who can explain what's happening. And right now, I'm all they've got." Before the officer could respond, the sergeant approached, older, sharper, carrying authority in the quiet lines of his face. He'd heard enough. His gaze swept the twins clinging to Ethan, then the splintered doorway behind them. "Let them go with him," he said. His voice held the final word of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We'll follow. Scene needs securing." Everything shifted. The officer stepped back. Ethan tightened his grip on the twins' hands. "Come on," he whispered. "We're going to your mom." The patrol car smelled of stale coffee and vinyl. The girls pressed against Ethan on either side, their shoulders shaking with every breath. Emma's fingers dug into his sleeve. Chloe stared out the window, eyes unfocused, as if still seeing the violence they'd escaped. "What's your mom's name?" Ethan asked softly. "Lauren," Emma whispered. "Lauren Mitchell." "Is she going to die?" Chloe asked. The question was a blade sharp and small, delivered with the fragile courage of someone who had already seen too much. Ethan watched the ambulance ahead of them slice through traffic. He hated the truth settling in his chest. He had seen patients in worse shape survive. He had also seen the opposite. "Your mom is fighting," he said gently. "And she's strong. Right now, that matters." The hospital loomed ahead, tall and cold, humming with sleepless energy. As soon as the car stopped, the twins bolted, dragging Ethan inside. Fluorescent light washed everything pale. Nurses rushed past, pushing stretchers, calling codes. A woman with tired glasses and a navy blazer approached. "I'm Karen Lewis, hospital social worker." She knelt to the girl's height. "Your mom is in surgery. You're safe here and we'll stay close." The twins looked up at Ethan again, not at Karen. He felt the weight of their trust settle onto his shoulders like a mantle he hadn't expected but could not refuse. A surgeon appeared then, mask pulled to her neck, dark hair escaping her cap. Family of Lauren Mitchell Ethan stepped forward with the twins. "I'm Dr. Mira Shah," she said. "Lauren is alive, but her injuries are severe. She's in a medically induced coma to protect her brain." "Will she wake up?" Emma asked, barely breathing. "I hope so," Dr. Shah replied honestly. "But we won't know yet." The twins trembled. Ethan rested a hand on their backs. "I'm staying," he whispered. "No matter how long this takes." The waiting room at St. Gabriel Medical Center felt like a world between worlds, too bright and too clean for the horror that had pushed Chloe and Emma into it. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed above their small, trembling bodies as they sat curled against each other on a plastic bench, looking as though they might shatter at any moment. Ethan paced just a few feet away, unable to sit still, the adrenaline of the past hour still pulsing sharp and hot in his veins. Every time the twins flinched, he felt it in his own chest, like their fear had become wired into him. When the glass doors slid open, a woman in a navy blazer approached them with calm steps and watchful eyes. She introduced herself as Karen Lewis, a hospital social worker, her tone warm but edged with professional precision. Her gaze swept over the twins and then over Ethan with a mixture of surprise and quiet calculation. She asked him if he was related to the girls, her voice soft but firm, as though she already suspected the answer. Ethan explained that he had never met them before tonight, that he was a blind date their mother was supposed to meet. Karen blinked, momentarily startled, and then looked at the girls again and saw the truth in their posture. They leaned toward him, instinctively clung to him silently, as though he were the only solid surface in a collapsing world. Before Karen could ask anything more, Sergeant Daniel Brooks entered the room with his partner, both of them carrying the exhaustion of too many violent calls. Brooks knelt in front of the twins, lowering himself to their eye level with a gentleness that contrasted with the badge on his chest. He explained that they needed to know what happened at their house only if the girls felt strong enough to speak. Emma whispered that 3 men broke in, and Chloe added that they yelled at their mother, pushing her to the ground. As the fragments of their story spilled out, the officers exchanged grim, tightened looks. Then came the moment that changed everything in the room. When Brooks gently asked if they recognized any of the attackers, both girls grew still like animals sensing danger before it arrives. They said yes. They recognized one of the men. And then, with tearful breaths caught between fear and betrayal, they whispered the name that hit the air like a brutal blow. Their father, Derek Collins. The man who once read them stories at bedtime, the man they loved before they learned to fear him. The officer stiffened. His partner stepped aside, speaking urgently into his radio as words like violent history and restraining order began to fill the hallway. Ethan felt a cold weight drop through him, pulling his heart down with it. He knelt beside the twins, instinctively positioning himself between them and the officers, even though no one posed a threat. It was instinct. It was protection. It was something he couldn't explain. When Brooks stood again, his expression had hardened into something resolute. He told Ethan that they were dispatching officers to secure the area to search for Derek and to track any associates he might have contacted. The danger was not over yet. Moments later, the doors to the waiting room burst open again, but this time with breathless urgency instead of fear. Henry and Susan Mitchell Lauren's parents rushed in with panic etched across their faces. The moment Chloe and Emma saw them, the twins ran into their arms with cries that carried hours of terror. Susan clutched them so tightly, her knuckles turned white, while Henry blinked rapidly, fighting tears he didn't want them to see. They asked what happened, asked if Lauren was alive, asked questions no one could fully answer yet. When they eventually looked up and saw Ethan, confusion crossed their expressions. Henry asked who he was, his voice trembling but polite. Ethan explained quietly, simply, that he had found the girls, that he stayed with them, that he wasn't going anywhere until they were safe. Henry stepped forward and gripped Ethan's hand with gratitude that silenced the room. For a man who seemed composed in crisis, that one gesture nearly broke him. Dr. Mira Shah appeared then, still in scrubs, her expression carrying the balance of exhaustion and control that only trauma surgeons mastered. She told them that Lauren was alive, but in critical condition, with a severe skull fracture, internal bleeding, and a swollen brain requiring a medically induced coma. The next days would be crucial, uncertain, frightening. Susan collapsed into Henry's arms in sobs that echoed through the corridor, while the twins stood frozen, staring at Dr. Shah as though she held their mother's fate in her hands. Ethan asked if the girls could see Lauren. Dr. Shah nodded, her voice gentler than before. She explained that Lauren wouldn't respond, but hearing familiar voices might help. The grandparents entered first their steps, slow and heavy, and the twins waited outside the ICU doors, with Ethan holding their small hands. When it was their turn, the girls walked forward as if approaching a sacred place, their breaths uneven, their shoulders trembling. Seeing their mother lying still, surrounded by wires and machines, broke something inside them that words could not reach. Emma whispered for her mother to wake up, her voice cracking on every syllable. Chloe told her softly that they were safe, that Ethan had found them, that help had come. Their small voices filled the room with a heartbreaking mix of innocence and despair. Ethan stood behind them, watching the monitors and the bruises, the stitched line along Lauren's scalp, and felt a surge of anger and protectiveness so strong it hollowed out his ribs. When the nurse guided them back into the hallway, Ethan watched the twins lean into each other, lifeless with exhaustion, but too afraid to close their eyes. He followed them into the waiting room again, where the grandparents sat silently, grief hanging thick around them. Henry looked up at him, gratitude and fear tangled in every line of his face. Susan traced circles on the twins' backs, trying to soothe them, even though she was struggling to steady her own breath. No one spoke for a long time. And then, as Chloe shifted closer to Ethan and Emma rested her head against his arm, he understood something that made his heart thrum with a strange, fierce clarity. He wasn't their father. He wasn't family. He wasn't meant to be anything more than a blind date waiting at a restaurant. But tonight, these two girls had chosen him. And he knew down to the marrow of his bones that he could not walk away now. Night settled over Chicago like a heavy, breathless hush. But inside St. Gabriel, the world refused to rest. Machines beeped, wheels squeaked against linoleum, voices rose and fell in clipped medical rhythms. Yet in the small family waiting area, time moved differently, slow, aching, suspended. Chloe and Emma had cried themselves into exhausted silence. Their grandparents were speaking with Dr. Shaw behind a closed door. Ethan sat with the twins tucked under each arm, one girl pressed against each side of his chest. They fit there too easily, as if they had belonged in that space long before tonight. Karen Lewis approached again, her steps quiet, careful. She lowered herself into the chair across from Ethan and folded her hands. "The Mitchells will stay in the city for now," she said softly. "They've booked a hotel across the street. But we have another issue to address." Ethan braced himself. "What issue? The girls cannot go back to their home tonight. Police have declared it an active crime scene." Karen's voice softened even further. Their grandparents offered to take them, but the twins refused. "They want to stay with you." Chloe lifted her head at the mention of the question. "We don't want to be anywhere near that house," she said. "Mommy isn't there. And Derek might come back." Emma nodded fiercely, small jaws set with a 7-year-old's version of determination. "We want to go with Ethan. He saved us." Karen exhaled, watching the way the girls leaned toward him instinctively. "You're the person they trust right now. Trauma bonds form fast. But official protocol requires them to stay with a guardian the department can clear. You are not that." "I understand," Ethan said quietly. "But if they need somewhere safe tonight, I'll take them. Just one night. Until their grandparents get settled. I'll stay in contact. I'll check in every hour if necessary." Karen studied him long enough that he felt the weight of her evaluation. But then she nodded. "Given the circumstances, I will request emergency clearance for temporary placement. Their emotional state is fragile. Consistency matters." Her voice softened. "If you're willing, I'll authorize it." The twins didn't wait for the final confirmation. They clung to Ethan's arms with relief so pure it almost hurt. An hour later, Ethan stepped out into the cold night air with Chloe and Emma, each holding one of his hands. The city felt different, dangerous, and too large for their tiny bodies. He had called Megan earlier, and she was now waiting in her car at the hospital entrance, Noah asleep in the booster seat behind her. When she saw the twins with Ethan, her face melted into something tender and startled. "Oh God," she whispered. Are they coming home with you for tonight?" Ethan murmured. "They don't want to go with anyone else." Megan didn't question it. She reached back and gently shook Noah. "Noah, sweetheart, wake up. We have visitors." Noah blinked himself awake, saw the twins, and without hesitation dug into his backpack. He pulled out a small blue race car with chipped paint, the one toy he had refused to sleep without since he was 3. He held it out to Emma without a word. "This always helps me when I'm scared," he said softly. Emma took it like it was sacred. Then Noah tugged off his jacket, the one with the superhero patch his mother had sewn on before she died. He handed it to Chloe. "You can wear this," he told her. "It keeps nightmares away." Chloe slipped it on, even though it fit awkwardly, the sleeves too short, the shoulders too narrow. She seemed to draw strength from it anyway. "Thank you," she whispered. At Ethan's small apartment, embarrassment hit him like a slap. Toys covered the living room floor. Laundry sat unfolded. Dishes waited in the sink. He had not expected company, certainly not wounded souls needing refuge. But the twins didn't seem to care. They stepped inside like he'd opened a fortress instead of a cluttered 2-bedroom space. Noah led them straight to his room. "You can sleep in here," he said proudly. "My bed is big, and I kick, but not too hard." The twins exchanged a look, then glanced at Ethan for permission. He nodded. Minutes later, the 3 children were tucked into the same bed, Noah in the middle like a buffer of innocent warmth. Chloe and Emma curled toward him, exhaustion finally dragging their small bodies into sleep. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching them breathe the rise and fall of their tiny chests, strangely steadying. Behind him, Megan whispered, "Ethan, what exactly happened tonight?" He shook his head slowly. "I went to Bellini's for a blind date. That's all. I thought it would be simple. I thought maybe I was ready." He swallowed. And then 2 little girls walked in and said their mother was dying. Megan touched his arm gently. "You didn't hesitate." Most people would have. Ethan stared at the children again. "I couldn't." In the dim light of the hallway, he added the words that had been forming slowly, painfully. They needed someone. And for some reason, they chose me. Morning seeped into the apartment slowly, but not gently. Ethan woke to the thin, stifled sound of a child crying and followed it to Noah's room. The door was cracked open. Inside, Chloe sat upright, with her knees pulled tightly to her chest, eyes glazed from nightmares she hadn't escaped. Emma leaned against her sister's shoulder, half awake, while Noah slept between them. Chloe's cheeks were still wet when she looked up at Ethan as if bracing for him to vanish. He crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, keeping his voice soft. She whispered that she saw Derek in her dream, that he was in the house again, that he was coming for them. The fear in her voice was sharp enough to shake the air. Ethan reminded her she was safe here, that Derek couldn't reach them, that her mother was fighting. He held their hands until their trembling eased and their breath steadied. By the time he finished scrambling eggs and slicing fruit unevenly, the doorbell rang. Henry and Susan Mitchell stood outside, looking as though they hadn't slept at all. The moment the twins saw them, they rushed forward, burying themselves in their grandparents' arms. Susan trembled as she hugged them. Henry fought tears he tried and failed to hide. They explained that the hospital had called Lauren, had made it through the night, though there were no improvements yet. Relief flickered through the room, but it carried fear with it, like a shadow that refused to detach. Henry gently told the girls he and Susan wanted to take them for the day, that they needed rest, clean clothes, familiarity. Before Ethan could respond, Chloe grabbed his arm and insisted they wanted to stay with him. Emma echoed her immediately. They didn't want to go anywhere near their house or away from the only person who had been with them through every terrifying moment. The grandparents exchanged a look full of confusion and quiet heartbreak. Susan tried gently reminding them she and Henry wanted to take care of them too. But Chloe's voice cracked as she said, Ethan knew how to help people who were hurt, that he didn't make them talk, that he just listened. The words hit the room with a weight no adult argument could counter. Henry eventually turned to Ethan, his voice rough with gratitude and uncertainty, and asked if Ethan would come with them to the hospital instead. Ethan didn't hesitate. He promised he wouldn't leave the girls, not now, not today. At St. Gabriel, the ICU smelled sharply of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Lauren lay motionless, surrounded by wires and machines, her face bruised and swollen, the left side of her skull wrapped in bandages. The rise and fall of the ventilator replaced the sound of her breathing, its mechanical rhythm unnervingly steady. The twins approached slowly, still holding hands. Emma whispered "Mommy," as if the word itself might shatter something fragile. Chloe touched her mother's hand with trembling fingers and told her they were okay, that Ethan was helping them, that Grandma and Grandpa were here too. The only response was the steady hum of machinery, but the twins believed their mother could hear them, and belief was all they had. When a nurse finally led them back to the waiting area, Sergeant Brooks arrived with news that seemed to hang in the air like a sudden shift in weather. Derek Collins had been found trying to flee toward the Canadian border. He and his 2 accomplices were now in custody, facing a stack of charges that would keep him locked away for decades. Emma sagged against Ethan, unable to sort her relief from her sorrow. She asked why her father would do something so terrible. Brooks answered gently, saying some people chose anger over their own family, that none of it was the girl's fault. Chloe whispered that he was still their dad, as if saying it out loud might explain the ache in her voice. Ethan told her someone could be a father and still be dangerously wrong, that what mattered now was their safety. As the grandparents spoke quietly with the police, the twins leaned into Ethan again. Their trust in him was unwavering, fierce, instinctive. And as he looked down at their small hands gripping his, Ethan understood something. With a depth that stole his breath, they had not run to him because he was convenient. They had run to him because somehow he had become their safe place. Days blurred together inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, the kind of days that stretched endlessly and folded in on themselves, until no one could tell morning from afternoon. Lauren remained in the ICU, suspended between consciousness and silence. Her breaths measured by machines, her future hanging in a place neither life nor death fully claimed. Yet in that fragile space, a strange rhythm began to form around her. Ethan arrived early most mornings with Chloe and Emma clinging to both his hands, their small fingers curling around his, as if he were the only force tethering them to safety. Their grandparents trailed behind, weary but steadfast, trying to be strong, even as fear hollowed them from the inside. Each visit felt like stepping into sacred territory. The twins always approached their mother's bed the same way, slowly, cautiously, breaths trembling with a mixture of hope and dread. Lauren lay motionless beneath soft hospital lighting, bruises darkening the edges of her face, bandages covering the wound along her scalp. The girls whispered to her anyway. Emma told her about the picture she drew in school, a tree with 3 birds and 1 nest. Chloe talked about Noah's silly dinosaur impressions and how Ethan taught them a breathing trick to stop nightmares. Their voices floated into the quiet room like fragile offerings, fragile attempts to reach a mother, trapped somewhere deep inside her own injured mind. Outside the ICU, the rest of the world continued to shift around them. Officers walked the hallways, nurses rushed carts past them, doctors murmured to each other in hushed tones. but for the twins. Life had narrowed to a single hallway, a single room, a single hope. When they left the hospital each afternoon, they always asked to go with Ethan. They didn't want to return to their grandparents' hotel. They didn't want to sleep in a strange room filled with someone else's memories. They wanted Noah's room. Noah's laugh, Ethan's steady presence. And each time Ethan said yes without hesitation. His apartment transformed almost overnight. Blankets remained on the couch because the girls preferred falling asleep there during movie nights. Crayon drawings began covering the refrigerator. Half-finished puzzles remained on the living room floor. He found himself cutting fruit into shapes to get Emma to eat more, while Chloe insisted on helping wash dishes even though she barely reached the sink. Noah moved through it all with a gentle patience, sometimes leading, sometimes following, often offering his bed to the twins because he had decided he liked sleeping on the couch anyway. The three children operated as one heartbeat, synchronized in a way that made Ethan pause some nights, wondering how something so unexpected could look so natural. During this time, Lauren's recovery hovered in small, fragile steps. On the 5th day, she moved her fingers. On the 6th, her eyelids fluttered. On the 7th, her lips parted, as if trying to speak, though no sound came. Each sign of progress sent a quiet tremor of hope through everyone who loved her. Dr. Mira Shah remained steady in her updates, reminding them recovery was unpredictable. Healing was uneven, and the brain did not follow schedules. But there was movement. There was possibility, and possibility for the first time in days felt like a miracle. Ethan visited even when he was not expected. Some evenings after the twins fell asleep at his apartment, he returned to the hospital alone, standing beside Lauren's bed, speaking softly. He told her the girls were safe. He told her Noah sang them a dinosaur song before bed. He described how Emma built a pillow fort taller than she was, and how Chloe insisted on being the one to turn off the nightlight each evening. He told her these things because he hoped she could hear, because silence felt like surrender, and surrender had never been part of who he was. One afternoon, as the sun filtered weakly through the ICU windows, Lauren's parents approached Ethan with a look that held both gratitude and desperation. Henry cleared his throat before speaking, his voice heavy with something unspoken. He explained that the girls refused to sleep unless they were near Ethan. They cried when separated from Noah. They woke panicked in the night unless they heard his voice reassuring them that the world was safe again. Susan added quietly that she and Henry were doing their best, but they were older. They couldn't endure the long nights, the nightmares, the constant need for grounding comfort that the twins required. Ethan listened, feeling a knot tighten slowly in his chest. He understood what they were asking before the words fully left their mouths. Henry finally said it plainly. Would Ethan continue caring for the girls, at least for now, until Lauren awakened, until decisions could be made with clarity rather than fear? For a long moment, the question hovered between them, weighted with responsibility, love, and the fragile trust built through crisis. He looked at the twins, sitting in the waiting room, with Noah curled around him like they believed he could shield them from an entire world. He looked at their small hands gripping his son's arm, at the way their faces softened only when they were beside him. And in that instant, the answer became clear. Not as a choice, but as something deeper, something that had already taken root. Yes, he said quietly. They can stay with me, as long as they need. The grandparents exhaled with visible relief, both gratitude and exhaustion washing across their expressions. They thanked him more times than he could count, each thank you heavier than the last. But Ethan didn't need the thanks. He didn't want it. What mattered were the girls who had run into his life drenched in terror, who had clung to him without knowing why, who had survived the unimaginable, because their mother had trusted one name. As days continued, Lauren's eyes began following sound. She recognized the girls in flashes. She whispered their names like broken pieces stitching themselves together again. Each moment of clarity brought tears not of fear, but of fierce determination. She was coming back, slowly, tenderly, relentlessly. And through it all, Ethan remained the steady presence she couldn't yet see but would soon learn about. The man who had not left. The man who had stepped into chaos without questioning whether he should. The man who had become unexpectedly and irrevocably part of the family her daughters were rebuilding. Healing was no longer a distant possibility. It had already begun. It had begun the moment two little girls ran into a restaurant breathless and terrified, and chose a stranger who would not fail them. By the time Lauren opened her eyes fully for the first time, nearly 10 days had passed since the attack, though to Chloe and Emma it felt like an entire lifetime. When Dr. Shah stepped into the waiting area with a gentler expression than usual, the twins froze as if afraid hope might shatter if they moved too quickly. And then her words came softly. Lauren was emerging from the medically induced coma. It would be slow, disorienting, uneven. But she was waking. The girls surged forward, gripping Ethan's hands as though he held them upright. Inside the room, the shift felt almost sacred. Lauren lay propped against white pillows, her bruises still dark, but her gaze flickering with faint recognition. She looked smaller somehow, not weaker, but softer, stripped of all the armor she had built over the years. When the twins approached, her eyes widened, and a sound barely above a whisper escaped her lips. Emma climbed carefully onto the bed. Chloe followed, and Lauren's trembling arms wrapped around them both. Her tears soaked into their hair as if grief and relief had collapsed into one feeling too powerful to separate. Over the next days, recovery unfolded in fragile layers. Some mornings, Lauren remembered everything with startling clarity. Other mornings, she woke confused, asking the same questions twice before recognizing her daughters again. Dr. Shah remained patient, explaining that trauma and brain swelling often created unpredictable patterns. Lauren's parents rotated shifts at the hospital, but Chloe and Emma insisted that Ethan stay. They refused to let go of his hand, refused to sit anywhere, except beside him, refused to leave without hearing from him that their mother was safe for the night. Ethan became part of the hospital's rhythm. Nurses nodded at him in recognition. Security staff waved him through without questions. Even the doctors seemed to understand that his presence kept the twins grounded in ways no medication could. When Lauren regained enough strength to hold longer conversations, she asked about the girls' routines. Henry and Susan explained everything gently, but it was Ethan the twins kept turning to. They told their mother how he stayed with them in the waiting room, how he held them when nightmares hit, how Noah shared his bed and toys without hesitation. Lauren listened, eyes shimmering with gratitude, and something deeper that she didn't yet name. When Lauren was moved from the ICU to a regular room, the atmosphere shifted. It no longer felt like standing at the edge of a precipice. The twins decorated her room with drawings, rainbows, smiling faces, a house with 5 stick figures holding hands. One afternoon, Emma proudly taped up a picture of a superhero labeled Ethan with a cape, made of scribbled blue marker. Lauren smiled through tears, tracing her daughter's handwriting with shaking fingers. Then she looked at Ethan and saw in him not just the man who saved her life, but the man who held her daughter's hearts during the darkest hours she never witnessed. Slowly, doctors began speaking about the next stage of recovery. Lauren would be discharged soon, but she could not return to her old house. The police had already advised against it. Too many memories lingered in the walls, too much violence soaked into the floors. Lauren agreed immediately. She did not want her daughters to step into that place again. Instead, she found a temporary apartment with good security and enough space for the girls to sleep comfortably. But on the first night, Chloe burst into tears, terrified of leaving Ethan and Noah. Emma clung to her pillow, begging Lauren to let them stay the way they had been. Lauren hesitated. She wanted her children close, but she also saw the fear in their eyes, the lingering trauma that had not yet released its grip. She looked at Ethan, torn between motherly instinct and the need to protect her daughter's sense of safety. Ethan knelt beside the twins and promised them they would visit every night, that they would still do homework together and eat dinner together, that nothing would change unless they felt strong enough for it. The reassurance calmed them, though reluctance still clung to their faces when Ethan finally took them home with him that night. As weeks passed, Lauren's strength returned. She relearned balance, retrained her muscles, and practiced breathing without feeling panic rising in her chest. She spent afternoons in physical therapy, pushing through pain, with a determination that stunned even her therapists. Ethan was often the one to drive her there quietly, waiting outside the gym, ready to walk beside her on each small victory. She found comfort in his presence, comfort she had not expected, comfort she did not fully understand yet. Watching him interact so naturally with the twins stirred something deep in her, something tender, something hopeful. All the while, the girls continued balancing their days between their mother's new apartment and Ethan's home. Noah never questioned it. He accepted Chloe and Emma as part of his world without hesitation, folding them into his routinics, as if he had always been meant to be their brother. Lauren watched the three of them together on evenings when Ethan brought the twins to visit, and felt her heart swell. Their laughter echoed through the apartment, and their tiny disagreements ended quickly. Their bond felt unbreakable. One night, after the children fell asleep on the couch beneath a pile of blankets, Lauren motioned for Ethan to join her in the kitchen. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence as she gathered her thoughts. She thanked him not just for saving her life, but for protecting her daughters emotionally, for becoming the steady presence she could rely on. When she told him she didn't know how to repay him, Ethan shook his head gently. He said he didn't do any of it expecting anything in return. He did it because the girls needed him, because they chose him. Lauren looked at him, then truly looked, seeing past the man covered in hospital fatigue and lingering worry. She saw the strength beneath the quiet demeanor, the deep well of compassion few people ever recognized on first glance. In that moment, something inside her settled, something she had not felt since long before the attack. A sense of safety, a sense of possibility, a sense that she and her daughters might not have to rebuild alone. That night after Ethan left, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, her daughters breathing steady on either side of her. She realized this crisis had done more than break the structure of her old life. It had revealed what was missing. It had led her to someone she never expected, someone who stepped into the ruins without hesitation, someone who cared for the girls as fiercely as she did. By the end of the month, Lauren understood the truth. They were no longer bound to Ethan by tragedy. They were connected by choice, by trust, by a fragile but growing hope. And as she held her daughters close, she felt certain that whatever came next, they would rebuild not as three frightened survivors, but as part of something larger, something that already felt like the beginning of a family. Autumn drifted across Chicago like a quiet redemption, softening the sharp memories of everything the past year had carved into their lives. By the time the leaves along Lincoln Park turned amber and scarlet, the worst storms had settled into something gentler. Lauren was no longer the battered, unconscious figure fighting for breath in an ICU bed. She had become steady again, walking without support, speaking with clarity, and relearning how to live in a world that had nearly taken her away from her daughters. The scar above her temple remained a faint reminder of everything she had survived. but she carried it with a quiet strength of someone who refused to let violence define her. Chloe and Emma continued spending most evenings at Ethan's apartment, though no one called it an arrangement anymore. It had become routine, natural, almost inevitable. They dropped their backpacks by the door, argued with Noah about whose turn it was to pick the show, and sprawled across the couch like three mismatched pieces of the same puzzle. The small apartment, once too cramped for even Ethan and Noah, now felt alive in ways he had never expected. The walls held laughter again. The nights held peace. And the children, bonded by fear and rebuilt by safety, treated each other like siblings who had always belonged together. Lauren watched this transformation with cautious awe. She hadn't intended for Ethan to become woven so deeply into their daily lives. Nor had she realized how much she depended on the sight of her daughters running comfortably into his arms. Whenever he brought the girls home, she noticed how their shoulders loosened, how their eyes softened, how Noah's presence steadied them without effort. She noticed, too, how her own heartbeat settled whenever Ethan stepped through her door. Healing, she realized, was rarely a solitary journey. Sometimes it arrived disguised as unexpected companionship. 6 weeks after Derek's sentencing, Lauren invited Ethan and Noah to her apartment for dinner. She had cooked spaghetti, though the slightly burned edges revealed she had forgotten to lower the heat while helping the girls with homework. When Ethan arrived, the faint smell of overcooked sauce lingered in the air. But he smiled anyway. The 5 of them crowded around her small table elbows, brushing laughter rising in soft waves. Chloe teased Noah for eating too loudly. Emma declared herself the official pasta critic. Noah attempted to defend his honor by insisting he was a professional slurper. And Lauren watched it all unfold with a tenderness that warmed the sharpest corners of her memory. After the plates were cleared and the children retreated to the couch for a movie, Lauren led Ethan into the kitchen. Her hands fidgeted with a dish towel, twisting the fabric as though gathering courage from its threads. She told him she'd been thinking about the girls, about the unstable world they had survived, about the fragile but resilient bonds forming now. She admitted that the nights they spent at Ethan's home were the only nights they slept without waking in fear that Noah had become an anchor in their recovery. That routine had become their safety. She looked at Ethan with vulnerable sincerity as she told him she wanted a co-parenting plan, not a temporary arrangement born of crisis. She wanted something steady, something defined, something that acknowledged the truth. Her daughters trusted him as much as they trusted her. The magnitude of her request settled into Ethan with surprising gentleness. He thought of Noah asking whether Chloe and Emma were his sisters now. He thought of the nights the twins had reached for him in the dark. He thought of Lauren's voice when she first regained consciousness, whispering that she trusted him without even knowing why. He agreed, quietly, fully, without hesitation. Their first real date came a week later on an early autumn evening painted with crisp air and warm streetlights. Lauren wore a dark blue dress that complemented the soft glow returning to her skin. Ethan, with a hint of awkward nostalgia, wore the same shirt he had planned to wear the night of their interrupted blind date. They met beneath the awning of Bellini's, not as strangers linked by tragedy, but as two people choosing each other freely. When they stepped inside and sat at the very same table where fate had ambushed them, the room felt different. Warmer, softer, filled with a quiet hum of possibility rather than dread. They talked long into the evening. Lauren spoke of the years she spent building her business while struggling through a marriage that dimmed her spirit. Ethan shared memories of Sarah, the love he still carried, and the grief he had learned to live beside. Together they pieced together fragments of themselves, with a tenderness neither had expected to rediscover. When they stepped out into the cool night air, Lauren reached for his hand. He took it not tentatively, but with a certainty that surprised them both. Months unfolded gently after that. Lauren regained her strength, fully attending physical therapy, managing her business again, making plans for her daughter's futures. Ethan and Noah began spending weekends at her apartment, while Chloe and Emma continued to stay at Ethan's during the week. The five of them moved like a unit, a strange but natural constellation of people, drawn together by fate and choice. Eventually, they made a decision that felt inevitable. They moved into a new house together, one with enough rooms for each child to build their world again. The home they chose stood on a quiet street surrounded by tall trees that whispered through the windows at night. Chloe painted her room lavender. Emma filled her walls with drawings. Noah proudly placed his superhero posters in the hallway where everyone could see them. Lauren filled the kitchen with plants and warmth, while Ethan built bookshelves and finally allowed himself to imagine permanence again. Slowly, beautifully, a new family formed. 1 year after the attack, on a soft spring afternoon, Ethan knelt in the backyard, while Chloe and Emma picked flowers and Noah practiced riding his bike. He told Lauren that there was no perfect moment, only real ones. And this one felt real. When he asked her to marry him, she said yes with tears that held a year's worth of gratitude and hope. The children shouted in celebration, claiming they had already predicted the proposal weeks ago. Months later, beneath string lights, hung across their backyard, Lauren and Ethan exchanged vows before family and friends. The twins dropped petals along the aisle. Noah insisted on being the official ring guardian, and as Ethan looked at the faces around him, the girls who trusted him, the boy who needed him, the woman who chose him, he understood the truth of everything that had led him here. Sometimes fate does not arrive gently. Sometimes it breaks through the door terrified and breathless in the form of two little girls who run toward you, not because you are perfect, but because you are the one who shows up. Created, he realized that the blind date he never attended had led him exactly where he was always meant to be. In the end, this story reminds us of a truth often overlooked by anyone studying trauma healing or human resilience. Safety is rarely built by perfection. It is built by presence. When someone chooses to show up in our darkest moment, that simple act becomes a turning point, powerful enough to reshape lives, families, and futures. What happened to Ethan, Lauren, Chloe, Emma, and Noah is not just a narrative of survival. It is a testament to how compassion, consistency, and courage can rebuild what violence attempts to destroy. If stories like this move, you stay with our community. Like this video, subscribe for more storytelling that heals and share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope appears in unexpected places. And tell me in the comments, still here.